Welcome back to Classic Books Deep Dive. I'm Michael, and today we're diving into a book that's, sure to spark some interesting conversations, I think.
It is.
The Art of Seduction by Robert Greene.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joanna, and I am looking forward to unpacking this one with you.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating exploration of a topic that, well, let's be honest, we don't always discuss openly.
Yeah, it's definitely a book that pushes some boundaries,
Yeah.
but that's part of what makes it so compelling, right?
Right.
Greene isn't afraid to delve into the psychology of seduction. He uses all these examples from history and literature and even pop culture to illustrate his points.
What I find so intriguing is how Greene approaches seduction as, like, a kind of art form. He argues that successful seducers are, like, master strategists, carefully crafting their approach, adapting to the unique dynamics of each situation. It's not just about charm or good looks. There's a real element of strategy and psychology involved.
Yeah, I love how he uses these larger-than-life figures like Cleopatra and Casanova to illustrate his points. It's almost like he's saying, look, seduction has been a part of human interaction for centuries. And these historical figures were masters of the game.
Take Cleopatra, for example. She wasn't considered a classic beauty, but she cultivated this aura of mystique and power that just drew people to her.
Yeah.
Greene argues that she understood the importance of spectacle, of creating these grand, unforgettable moments that would captivate her audience.
That whole story about her sailing into Rome on a barge dressed as Venus,
Oh, yeah.
it's pure theater, pure seduction.
Right.
And it worked, and she completely charmed Mark Antony.
It speaks to the idea that seduction is often about creating an illusion, a fantasy world that your target just can't resist. You're not just presenting yourself, you're creating a whole experience.
And Greene doesn't shy away from the fact that this can be a bit manipulative, right? He's not sugarcoating things.
No.
He's laying bare the mechanics of seduction, the psychology behind it.
Right, and I think that's what makes the book so valuable. It's not like a how-to guide. It's more like a deep dive into the human psyche,
Yeah.
exploring the ways in which we can be influenced, persuaded.
One of the things that really stood out to me was his discussion of the 9 seducer archetypes.
Yes.
It's fascinating to see how he breaks down these different approaches to seduction, each with its own strengths and weaknesses.
It's almost like he's created a taxonomy of seduction, categorizing these different personalities and approaches. You have the Sirens, who radiate this raw sexuality, the Rakes, who embody danger and excitement, the ideal lovers who romanticize and idealize their targets.
Wow.
The list goes on.
I'm curious to hear more about these archetypes. I mean, 9 seems like a lot.
Yeah, there are.
Let's start with the Sirens. What makes them so effective?
Well, think of someone like Marilyn Monroe. She projected this incredible sexual energy, but she also maintained a certain distance, an air of mystery.
Right.
It's that push and pull, that combination of allure and inaccessibility that just drives people crazy.
So it's not just about being overtly sexual. It's about creating a sense of longing, of wanting what you can't have.
Right.
It's that old saying, familiarity breeds contempt.
Exactly. The Sirens understand that scarcity creates value.
Yeah.
They make themselves a limited edition item, and people are naturally drawn to that.
Okay. What about the Rakes? They seem like they operate on a totally different wavelength.
They do. The Rakes are all about the thrill of the chase, the excitement of the forbidden. Think of someone like Casanova.
Oh, yeah.
They embody danger, rebellion, and that can be incredibly intoxicating.
Yeah, it's like they tap into our primal desires, our urge to break the rules, and experience something outside of the ordinary.
Absolutely. They're masters of creating that sense of excitement, intrigue.
Right.
They're always pushing the boundaries, testing the limits, and that's incredibly seductive to certain people.
All right, we've got the Sirens who lure you in with their allure, and the Rakes who tempt you with their danger.
Yes.
What other archetypes are out there?
Well, there's the Star, who cultivates an aura of mystery and elusiveness. Like Marlene Dietrich. They're like blank screens onto which others project their fantasies and desires.
So it's almost like they're seducing through their absence,
Right.
their unattainability.
Right.
It's like they're saying, I'm so fascinating, I don't even need to try.
Exactly. They understand the power of suggestion, of letting others fill in the blanks with their own imaginations.
Yeah.
It's a very subtle but incredibly effective form of seduction.
I'm starting to see how these archetypes can play out in everyday life, even outside of romantic relationships.
Absolutely.
Like in a work setting or with friends.
Greene argues that seduction is a fundamental part of human interaction. We're constantly trying to influence and persuade each other, whether we're aware of it or not.
So learning about these archetypes can actually be a valuable tool for understanding ourselves and the people around us.
Yes.
It's like he's giving us a new language for decoding human behavior.
I couldn't agree more. It's about recognizing those subtle dynamics at play in our interactions and understanding how we can use these insights to become more effective communicators and negotiators.
So if our listeners are intrigued by what they're hearing, would you say it's worth checking out The Art of Seduction for themselves?
Absolutely. Even if you're not looking to become like a master seducer, I think this book offers such valuable insights into human psychology and the dynamics of power and influence.
I'm with you on that. It's a book that makes you think differently about the world and the people around you.
Mm.
And who knows, you might even learn a thing or two about yourself along the way.
Now let's delve into some of the specific techniques that Greene outlines in the book. Because it's not just about these broad archetypes. He actually provides a playbook of sorts for the aspiring seducer. So Greene outlines a sort of step-by-step process for seduction, breaks it down into 4 distinct phases. It's fascinating how he lays it all out.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are these 4 phases?
He calls them disarm through strategic weakness and vulnerability, confuse desire and reality, the perfect illusion, isolate the victim, and finally, deepening the effect through extreme measures.
Whoa, okay, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I can already see how some of these might raise some eyebrows, ethically speaking.
Yeah.
But let's take them one at a time. What's this about disarming someone through weakness?
It sounds counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But Greene argues that by appearing vulnerable, by downplaying your own power, you can actually make your target feel more powerful, more in control. It appeals to their protective instincts.
So instead of coming on strong, you make yourself seem a little bit needy. Is that the idea?
In a way, yes. You're creating a dynamic where they feel needed, wanted, like they're the one with the upper hand. It disarms their defenses because they don't see you as a threat.
Interesting. And then how do you go from playing the victim to creating this perfect illusion?
Well, this is where you tap into your target's fantasies, their desires, those secret longings that everyone has. You create an experience, an illusion that feels almost too good to be true. It's about feeding their imagination, giving them a taste of their dreams.
So it's not just about presenting yourself in a certain way. It's about creating a whole world around them, a world that caters to their deepest desires.
Precisely. And this is where the isolation tactic comes in.
Okay, I was wondering about that one. How does isolation play into the seduction process?
Think about it. When you're surrounded by your usual support system, your friends, your family, you have people who can offer different perspectives, who can, ground you in reality.
Right.
But when you're isolated, you become much more susceptible to the illusion that's being created.
So you're saying that by separating your target from their usual influences, you make them more dependent on you, more likely to buy into the fantasy you're presenting.
Exactly. Their defenses are down, their critical thinking is compromised, and they're much more likely to fall under your spell.
And then comes the deepening the effect through extreme measures phase. This is where things start to get a little bit intense, right?
This is where you push the boundaries, you introduce elements of transgression, of taboo. It's about heightening the emotional intensity, making the experience even more intoxicating.
Some of the techniques Greene describes here, like affecting a regression or stirring up the transgressive and taboo, they sound pretty manipulative.
There's no denying that some of these techniques can be used in harmful ways. But it's important to remember that Greene is writing from a neutral perspective. He's not necessarily endorsing these techniques. He's simply laying bare the mechanics of seduction, showing us how they work.
So it's up to us, the readers, to decide how we want to use this knowledge, whether we choose to employ these techniques ourselves or simply recognize them in the world around us.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. And understanding the psychology of seduction can be incredibly empowering, even if you never actually use these techniques yourself.
Let's dive into some of these extreme measures a bit more. What exactly does it mean to affect a regression?
It's a fascinating concept. Greene suggests that by tapping into your target's childhood memories, particularly those related to parental figures, you can encourage them to regress to a more childlike, dependent state.
So you're essentially trying to recreate that feeling of comfort and security that they felt as a child, but with an added layer of eroticism.
You got it. It's about triggering those deep-seated desires for comfort, for validation, for someone to take care of them.
And how does stirring up the transgressive and taboo play into this?
Well, there's a certain allure to the forbidden, to breaking the rules.
Right.
By hinting at a willingness to cross those boundaries, to do things that are considered taboo, you create a sense of excitement, of danger, of exclusivity. It taps into that rebellious streak that we all have to some degree.
So you're saying that a little bit of badness, strategically deployed, can actually be quite seductive.
Exactly. It's about playing with fire, pushing the limits, and creating an experience that's both thrilling and a little bit dangerous.
Okay, this is all starting to make sense. But I have to admit, some of this stuff is a bit unsettling.
I understand. It's a lot to take in. But that's the power of Greene's work. He forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about human nature, to see the world through a different lens.
I'm curious, does Greene offer any advice on how to resist these techniques? I mean, if we're constantly being bombarded with these subtle forms of manipulation, how do we protect ourselves?
That's a great question, and it's one that Greene addresses in the book. He argues that the best defense against seduction is self-awareness.
Okay.
The more we understand about these techniques, the less likely we are to fall prey to them. It's about knowing ourselves, knowing our weaknesses, and being vigilant about the ways in which we can be influenced.
So knowledge is power, as they say.
Absolutely. The more we understand about the psychology of seduction, the more empowered we are to navigate the complexities of human interaction.
This is all so fascinating. But before we get too carried away with the darker side of seduction, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the idea that seduction can also be a force for good. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Of course. I think it's important to remember that seduction, at its core, is about connection. It's about creating a spark, generating excitement, and forging those deep, meaningful bonds that make life so rich.
So it's not always about manipulation and power games. It can also be about genuine attraction, about finding common ground and building relationships.
Exactly. And Greene even talks about the importance of self-transformation, of becoming the most attractive and interesting version of ourselves.
So it's not just about learning tricks and techniques. It's also about personal growth and self-discovery.
Absolutely. I think that's an important distinction. The Art of Seduction can be a dangerous book if it's taken as a purely manipulative guide. But if you approach it with a sense of self-reflection, with the desire to understand the deeper dynamics of human connection, it can be a valuable tool for personal growth.
And one of the things that really resonated with me is Greene's argument that seduction is pervasive. It's not just about romantic relationships. It's about all kinds of human interactions.
Right. He suggests that we're constantly seducing each other, whether we're aware of it or not. Every interaction, from a job interview to a casual conversation, involves a certain degree of influence and persuasion.
So in a sense, we're all playing this game, even if we're not consciously aware of the rules.
And I think that's a powerful insight. By becoming more aware of the subtle dynamics of seduction, we can become more effective communicators, more persuasive leaders, and more engaging individuals.
It's like Greene is giving us a secret decoder ring for human behavior.
That's a fantastic analogy. The Art of Seduction gives us this new lens through which to view our interactions, helping us to understand the motivations and desires that drive our own behavior and the behavior of those around us.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up this deep dive into the Art of Seduction, I'm curious, what are your final thoughts on this controversial but undeniably fascinating book?
It's a book that really stays with you. The Art of Seduction challenges us to think differently about how we interact with each other, to recognize those power dynamics that are always at play.
And it makes you wonder, are we all just pawns in this grand game of seduction? Or can we use this knowledge to become more conscious, more intentional in our interactions?
I think that's the key takeaway here, becoming more self-aware. The more we understand about the psychology of seduction, the more we can choose how we want to engage with the world around us. We can decide whether we want to play the game or simply observe it from a more informed perspective.
It's like Greene is giving us a backstage pass to the human psyche.
Yes.
We get to see how the machinery works, all the levers and pulleys that drive our behavior.
That's a great way to put it. And once you see how those mechanisms work, it's hard to unsee them. You start to notice them everywhere, in advertising, in politics, in everyday conversations.
It can be a bit disillusioning, can't it? To realize that so much of what we do is driven by these unconscious desires and motivations.
It can be, but it can also be incredibly liberating. Because once you understand the rules of the game, you can start to play it on your own terms. You can choose to be more strategic, more intentional in your interactions.
So it's not about becoming a master manipulator. It's about becoming a more conscious participant in the game of life.
Exactly. It's about using this knowledge to enhance our relationships, our careers, and our overall understanding of the human experience.
One thing that really resonated with me is Greene's emphasis on the importance of authenticity. He argues that the most effective seducers are those who are genuine, who are true to themselves.
That's a crucial point, because ultimately seduction is about connection. And true connection can only happen when we're being authentic, when we're letting our true selves shine through.
So it's not about putting on a mask or pretending to be someone we're not. It's about finding that sweet spot where our true selves align with the desires of the other person.
Exactly. It's about finding that point of resonance where we can connect on a deeper level, where we can create something truly meaningful and lasting.
Well, I think we've done a pretty thorough job of unpacking the art of seduction. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap things up?
I think it's a book that everyone should read, even if you're not particularly interested in the topic of seduction. It offers valuable insights into human psychology and the dynamics of power and influence that are relevant to all of us.
I couldn't agree more. It's a book that will make you think differently about the world and the people around you. And who knows? It might even inspire you to become a little bit more seductive yourself. Just remember to use your powers for good. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the art of seduction. Until next time, happy reading, everyone.